Welcome to UFC Breakdown. The Octagon is headed back to the UK. A pivotal matchup between two light heavyweight contenders tops a fight card stacked with British talent looking to take on the world's best. We're going to be previewing that main event and a whole lot more. Here's what's coming up on today's show. Jimmy the poster boy Manuwa joins us in the UFC Breakdown studio to talk about how he will once again headline in London against Ultimate Fighter winner Corey Overtime Anderson. In Fight Focus, we see how Manuwa's power punching style matches up with the dangerous wrestling ability of the American. We'll tackle the co-main events between grappling ace Gunnar Nelson and lethal striker Alan Jouban. And we head to Florida for an exclusive interview with Brad One Punch Pickett as he prepares for one last dance in London. So joining me in studio are the usual suspects, Fighters Only editor Nick Peet and of course UFC analyst Dan Hardy. So the UFC coming to London is always a big special occasion. I think it's the 20th time the Octagon is going to land in the UK. So a nice little anniversary there. Nick, firstly, let's come to you then and talk about the fight card. Bottom to top, it's loaded with British talent, really showing how far European mixed martial arts has evolved.
Yeah, very much. The UK angle is fantastic. For British fight fans, we couldn't ask for any more. We've got two all-UK derbies on there to really get things going early on. And then for me, two of the hottest prospects in the UK, Tom Breese, Mark Jacasey, both in big fights. Both, for me, you know, maybe didn't live up to expectation last time out. A lot of pressure them to perform this time around. And then finishing that prelim card as well, Joe Duffy. Great fight for him against Razem Modadi. Really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and of course with the main card as well, some really interesting storylines there.
Yeah, of course. Brad's big farewell. You know, it doesn't get any more emotional than that. We'll be hearing from him later in the show, I'm sure. And Jimmy at the top of the bill is really something that the London fans have been crying out for. Seeing him back home, back in London, after the win he had in Manchester last time out. There's lots of opportunities at light heavyweight movement for 2017, and this could be Jimmy's big year. Yeah, absolutely. Dan, you and I are going to be commentating over at the O2. I know you like to geek out about certain things. Are there any fights during your research that have really jumped off the page?
Well, the one that stands out on the undercard for me is Brett Johnsy and Entwistle, because I think Entwistle's, he's got some regrets of his first couple of fights in the UFC. He's made a couple of mistakes, and I think he can correct those going into this. Brett Johns looked like an old-time pro when we saw him in his debut. He looked very, very calm, very professional. And I think we're going to see big things from him. Also, his corner team were like a NASCAR pit team. I mean, they were amazing, really, really efficient. And then the main card, it's the co-main event for me. Jouban against Gunnar Nelson is just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, lovely addition to that card. Well, let's get straight into it then, and we will welcome in our very special guest. He is one half of the main event in London, Jimmy, the poster boy Manuwa.
Jimmy Manuwa, representing London, England.
So, Jimmy, welcome to the UFC Breakdown Studios. Thanks for coming down. So let's get straight into it then. I can pretty much still hear the Manchester fans roaring after your victory. You are now headlining in your hometown of London. How excited are you?
Yeah, I'm really excited to headline in London. Mate, the Manchester crowd was something else, you know, and after the knockout, it was great to put on a great performance in front of them.
So you've been out in Stockholm recently, training with Alexander Gustafsson. He was the man that you headlined with in London in 2014. Now, from an outsider's point of view, that's a pretty unique set of circumstances. How does that work?
We knew each other before the fight, but we hadn't actually trained together. So when the fight came along, it was something I couldn't turn down. So I took the fight, we spoke and said, let's get the fight out of the way and then we'll get back to training after the fight. So I think it's the best training camp in the world, for me anyways. It's got such great fighters over there and the schedule over there is like tailor-made for me.
So we were chatting about this earlier. You were talking about the fact that you don't like to watch much of your opponent's footage before the fight, but you've seen a little bit of Corey Anderson. What are your thoughts on him as an opponent?
Corey's a great fighter. He won the Ultimate Fighter, and I've watched a couple of his fights, and he's got a great engine. He's very durable, and you know, he mixes martial arts up really well, and that. So it's going to be a good challenge for me. But you know, I'm full of confidence.
Corey's got a similar background from your last opponent, Ovin Simprue. Obviously, probably a bit more of an advanced striker, but that performance last time, Jimmy, in Manchester, arguably the performance of your UFC career, it felt like you made a statement that night. Would that be true? Yeah,
well, for me, everything came together. Because I've had stoppages in the octagon before, and it's been due to injury and stuff like that. But everything came together. I caught him clean with a couple of great shots, and you know, that's what happened.
And just before you knocked him out, you pointed at somebody in the crowd. What was that about? Because you had a kind of a real knowing look in your eyes. You were like, yep. And then next minute he's on the floor.
Yeah, no, it was one of my training partners, Mo. He was screaming, hands up, sort of thing. I said, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. I'm going to get him, and then that was it.
Nice.
I've been watching some of your training footage, Jimmy. This one is for 5 rounds, and I've heard a term that both you and Andreas Michael, your coach, have been using, petrol. What is this term, petrol? What does it mean? Because you seem to be reacting whenever someone shouts it out.
Petrol just means like petrol in a tank of the car, you know. So it's just like when we're doing cardio, when we're sparring, when we're doing pads and everything, it's like petrol, more petrol. And that, so it's just something like that.
It's a little motor vehicle reference. We know you're a bit of a petrol head as well.
Yeah.
So Corey Anderson, hometown, big event. You get past this guy. What's next?
What's next after Corey Anderson's? I think I deserve a title shot. I'm not ranked number 4 now, and number 3 and number 2 are fighting. They're busy, so I want a winner out of. And DC and Rumble are fighting in April after my fight, so I'd like the winner out of them.
Prediction for that fight? Who's going to win out of those 2?
I don't know. I think it's a genuine 50-50 fight, and it's just a matter of who plays their game plan the most, the better. And mate, if Rumble touches him, we've all seen what he can do. But if DC does the same thing that he did last time, then who knows what can happen. You know, but I think I prefer Rumble to win. He's more of an exciting fighter, and I think I'd make a good matchup with him again.
Nice one. So you've got a couple of people coming along to London, I take it, for this one?
Got a whole load of people coming. A whole load of people. It's my hometown, and you know, I just want to put on a great performance for them.
Nice one. Well, Jimmy, thank you for coming down, taking time out of your schedule. We wish you all the very best for your final moments of preparation. Enjoy that walkout and the performance. Thanks again.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
Welcome back to UFC Breakdown. Today we're previewing the upcoming fight card at London's O2 Arena, where hometown hero Jimmy Manuwa will be taking on Ultimate Fighter Season 19 winner Corey Anderson in the main event. Time now to take a closer look at the stylistic matchup in Fight Focus as we head on over to Dan, who is waiting at the screen. Dan, firstly, tell us what the numbers say.
Thanks, John. Really interested in this one. The first thing I want to point out, obviously, stature's quite similar. There's a slight height advantage for Corey Anderson, but this is what I want to focus on. Look at the emphasis on the takedowns for Corey Anderson. This is really his game. This really defines what it's all about. Now, I also want to clarify that submission attempts for Jimmy Manuwa. He's only had 1 submission on his record. It wasn't in the UFC, but this is submission attempts, and I will cover that in a second when we talk about his takedown defense, because he does like to threaten the neck a lot. He's a very strong individual, and he can bear down on people very well. The other thing I want to point out as well is Jimmy's takedown defence. Obviously, 63% is very high, and I really think he's going to have to draw on that in this fight, because for my money, Corey Anderson is going to be trying to push forward and drag this fight to the floor so he can start to smother Jimmy and drag him into the later rounds. If we get into the fight clips, though, this is where it gets really interesting. Now, with Jimmy Manuwa, you'll notice with Jimmy, he doesn't tend to throw a lot of combinations. It's a lot of single punch, single kick, single power shots. This is because he's such an explosive, powerful individual. He likes to wind up, he likes to land clean, single powerful shots. And what's nice about this as well is a lot of the time when we see a fighter that is so powerful in their striking, they tend to favour one particular technique. But with Jimmy Manuwa, you'll see a real diverse skill set. You'll see him attacking with different boxing combinations, flying knees, head kicks, lots of low kicks as well. So everything that Jimmy throws at you is there to do damage. It's there to hurt you and slow you down. Corey Anderson's going to have this on his mind because he's seen this Kyle Kingsbury fight. He's seen the damage that Jimmy Manuwa can do with every single limb on his body, and he will capitalise on it if he sees you hurt. If you watch his last fight against OSP, one thing that you'll notice is that when he has his fighter hurt, this is when he starts to throw punches in quick succession. He'll land those clean shots, and then his confidence grows, and you can see he'll start to cut the octagon down. He'll pick his shots, and that left hook to the body, he told me this himself, it's one of his favourite punches. And when he landed it a couple of times earlier in the fight, he got the reaction he wanted out of OSP. And when he lands it here, you can see the reaction that it has on OSP. He feels the need to do something, so he throws his jab out, which allows Jimmy to load his power, transfer it into his right hand, and because he slipped out the way, he knows that OSP's in punching range, so he can throw that straight over the top. And it was a beautiful knockdown. And fair play to OSP, he managed to get back to his feet, but it didn't take much longer for Jimmy to set him up for a big, powerful left hook. And once he'd landed the right hand as well, OSP was so timid of the power that Jimmy could generate that this short left hook there put him on the canvas, and that was the end of the night. And it was a great performance from Jimmy over a guy that had taken John Jones 5 rounds, which is really a massive statement for Jimmy to be able to get in there and finish him within 2. As we move on to the next clip, we're going to look at Corey Anderson's striking. Now, being a wrestler, we wouldn't really expect him to excel in the striking range, but in my opinion, he actually looks like a striker that learned wrestling secondary. He works a lot with Mark Henry, and you'll see he's got great footwork, much like Frankie Edgar and some of his other teammates. He likes to back his opponents up against the fence where he can threaten with his wrestling if he needs to. But here he can bear down his opponents. He uses the tie clinch very well to weigh on their head and starts to land powerful shots. And when he does have somebody rocked, this is something I think is going to be very useful because Jimmy Manuwa is a very, very difficult individual to hold down. Whereas if he can pull the legs away from Jimmy and then start to strike as Jimmy's getting back to his feet, it's going to force Jimmy to work. It's going to force him to defend, to cover up, which means that Corey Anderson's going to be in a far safer position to start letting his own shots go. And when he gets on the floor, he's got excellent top position and excellent ground and pound. And really, that's what's going to be a problem for Jimmy if he does get to the floor, is getting back to his feet under such a strong, powerful wrestler. But with Corey Anderson, he's so good at moving backwards and catching people as they move in. I would expect him to be kind of coaxing Jimmy and trying to draw him onto those shots, because then this is what's going to come afterwards. He's going to change level, he's going to smash his opponent to the floor, and then he's going to start to smother. And he's got great timing on this double leg as well. He's very good at level changing as his opponent steps in. Look at that step in from Maldonado. And another thing that you'll notice is as he's taking somebody down, you'll notice him sweeping his body to the side. He moves his feet around so he can clear the guard. He always likes to land inside control if he can. He does it again here against Tom Lawley. You'll see him sweeping the base leg out with his right hand. He'll scoop that to the side so he lands inside control, and then he can start to wear on his opponent. Very worst case scenario, he lands in half guard, and he's very, very dangerous from that position as well because he's very good at spreading his base. Now, if he takes you down against the fence, and Jan Blachowicz found out this very, very clearly, he'll stack you up against the fence, so he's going to force you to choose a side. You'll see how little space there is here for Jan Blachowicz' body, and he'll pinch the hip so he can control your base. So basically what he's doing is he's forcing you to choose a side. In this situation, he's forced Jan to lean over to the left side. You'll see him switch to the right here, and immediately Corey steps in and pinches him. And what this does is it makes his head very available to those short chopping elbows that he lands. And in his last fight against Sean O'Connell, it was very much the same thing, but just with much more confidence than we've seen in the past. He took him down, he smothered him and beat him up, and then we see this slow progression from one position to another. He takes mount, and Sean O'Connell really had no answer for it, and eventually he managed to get the TKO stoppage. But if he takes Jimmy down against the fence, expect him to try and stack him up to make it uncomfortable and cramped and force him to choose a side to put his head so he can then start to work the elbows. Jimmy Manuwa, though, he's not the easiest person to take down. He's a very big, strong, powerful athlete who got a lot bigger in his last couple of training camps. He's been working on strength and conditioning, and anytime he gets his hands on somebody, you'll see he's got real good control of the body. He's able to move them around. He uses this a lot, the single necktie and the underhook, and he can control that posture. He does it again here on his takedown defense, which then lines up the knees, which is one of his most devastating weapons, as Kyle Kingsbury knew in that fight in Nottingham. It was a real good performance, and you'll see again here with the underhook, he'll threaten the neck, he'll squeeze the neck, which is where his submission attempts come from, but it also sets up his knees. And he's got a great sprawl as well. For someone who's such a good athlete as Jimmy Manuwa, you only need to teach him a few basics for him to start really picking it up and causing some of these top-level fighters some problems. And this is the key of this. Look at this. Jan Blachowicz has got this pulled in. This is a really, really tight single leg. But Jimmy's also got this hook here. So he's going to use that to pry his opponent off. You can see him straighten his leg away and pulling his hips back to break the grip, and then he's straight on the neck again. And as soon as he sees his opponent hurt, like I said before, he'll back them up. He'll start to pour on the pressure. And when people know that Jimmy's attacking, they know he's such a powerful athlete, so they start to back up, they start to shell up, they cover their head because that's the priority, which then opens up that left hook to the body, which OSP fell victim to.
Lovely stuff. Well, Nick, I was lucky enough to go out to the All-Stars and watch Jimmy in action. And yes, they are looking at the takedown defence, but Jimmy is all about the knockout.
Of course he is. You know, that's why he's the British poster boy of MMA, isn't he? That's why the fans love him so much, because you know exactly what you're getting. You're getting plenty of bang for your buck. Guy's got 80-90% knockout ratio throughout his entire career. He will be going in there to put on an absolute show. Make no mistake, this is scheduled for 5 rounds. Jimmy will have trained for 5 rounds. This isn't going 5 rounds.
In London, his hometown.
Exactly.
Manchester loved him. London will love him as much, if not more.
Manchester was insane, and it was a crazy hour of the night as well, but the atmosphere was unbelievable. So let's take Jimmy back home to London, in front of his friends, his family and everything else, in a fight, I'll be honest with you, that's perfect for his style as well. I think Anderson's going to come rushing at him. This is a don't blink fight.
Yeah. Dan, what's interesting about this is both Corey and Jimmy were actually relative latecomers to mixed martial arts. So, for my liking, they still have a real thirst for learning. So we might see some different looks each time they come to the octagon.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Jimmy's learning all the time. I mean, he's such a talented athlete, which is why he's got so far in the sport with such a limited skill set as what he's got, really. I mean, if you look at some of the other guys in the division, their skill set's far more broad than Jimmy's, but because he's so powerful, he can get away with a lot of things. Corey Anderson, coming from a wrestling background, has stepped into Mark Henry's team after the Ultimate Fighter and just seems to be going from strength to strength. I mean, Mark Henry's got a real good ability to see a fighter and to build a striking game around what they've already got, and that's what we're seeing with Anderson.
So, Nick, we have top-of-the-tree fighters in the light heavyweight division. So this is the light heavyweight division really has been the most prestigious division for the UFC over time. A lot is up for grabs for both of these. Yeah,
of course. As you point out then, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, you know, Rampage. You know, this is the golden division, if you like, and you know, John Jones coming back in the summer. Let's not forget about that. You know, it's bubbling right now, and whoever comes out of this fight victorious with his hand raised is in a fantastic position because the belt's being contested again. John Jones has come. There's so many opportunities out there. A win in London, you're literally looking at one more win later in the year and a title shot.
Do you think, though, it could be a potential banana skin? OSP had fought John Jones. Jimmy's right there at the top now and everyone's looking at him. Corey Anderson is still kind of making his way. Is this more of an opportunity for Corey and a potential, maybe a skid there for Jimmy if he doesn't get through this?
I think possibly fighting at home the fighters react in different ways. For me personally, after the way he performed against OSP in Manchester and he felt that Manchester crowd, you know, we could hear it in his voice, we spoke to him today. I think going back to London, this couldn't come at a perfect time for Jimmy. I think if it was away from London, it may work against him, but I think on this occasion, being at home in front of family and friends, knowing how close he is, I think he's going to run out, he's going to meet Anderson in the middle of the octagon, and he's going to let leather go.
Dan, you really like Mark Henry and the way that he coaches his guys, and you've probably already done this. If you're in his seat right now preparing Corey for Jimmy, how do you think he approaches this one?
I think he's got to use his counter-striking. He's got very good footwork, and that's why I feel like he looks like a seasoned striker as opposed to a guy that's come from wrestling and learned striking as a secondary skill. You'll see how he moves back. He's got great counter-striking as people are moving forward to attack, and we know Jimmy's going to be pushing forward. So if he can use those counter-strikes to kind of gauge Jimmy's progress and then start to look for that level change, that's when he's going to catch Jimmy. It's going to be far easier to take him down if Jimmy's moving forward as opposed to backed up against the fence when you've got to deal with all that strength. I mean, you can see when somebody shoots in, he overlocks them with these massive... I mean, he's got such a huge mantle when he leans over somebody. He's a very powerful individual, so timing is key to get Jimmy on the floor as opposed to muscle.
I think the strength and power of Jimmy scares these guys when they get in there. OSP, you could literally, as soon as Jimmy hit him with that first left to the body, you could see him back off straight away. Like, what was that? You know, what was just hit me? And I think, you know... Jimmy, for me, is the sleeping giant of this division because he's got so much power. Him and Rumble, you know, these guys are one-punch knockout artists to the core.
Well, let's just focus on that then. What Jimmy was saying earlier is he thinks he should get the title shot if he wins this fight. What do you think, though? I mean, John Jones is in the waiting right there.
100%.
Is John Jones for you?
100%. Yeah,
right.
I think arm raised in London for me. Jimmy Manuwa's got to call out John Jones. We know John Jones is coming back in the summer.
It would be like a contender.
Just say, listen, John, we know you're coming back. I'm the welcome party. I'm waiting for you. Let's do it.
So you're coaching Jimmy in his post-fight interview for London. Good stuff. Nice one. Well, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, we're going to get into the co-main event. Welcome back to UFC Breakdown, where we are previewing the upcoming fight night in London on March 18th. Time now to turn our attention to the co-main event, a welterweight matchup between Icelandic fan favourite Gunnar Nelson and dangerous knockout artist Alan Jouban.
Gunnar Nelson is back.
I've loved this fight since the moment it was announced. Dan, if you could you take us through the stats?
My pleasure. This is a real treat for me, this one, a real puzzle for me as an analyst. Gunnar Nelson, I've been a fan of his for a long time, since he started his career, basically. And he's a very, very interesting fighter, kind of like a trapdoor spider. He likes to lure you into a false sense of security and then he jumps on you. Alan Jouban has risen through the rankings very, very quickly. He's a talented southpaw kickboxer. He actually used to be one of my sparring partners back in the day, and I was impressed with him then, and he's grown so much since then. He gathered his experience very, very quickly as well. He's risen through the rankings with very little resistance. But if we look at their games, Alan is the more fluid striker. He's a southpaw Muay Thai fighter. He's got a lot of experience in that range, whereas Gunnar Nelson is the kind of fighter that likes to lunge in with a single shot and drag you down to the floor, where he can kind of work you over with an oppressive ground game like we've seen in most of his fights. We can't count Alan Jouban out in that range, though. If it hits the mat, Alan is a brown belt under Eddie Bravo at 10th Planet, so he's going to have all kinds of weird and wonderful rolls and escapes that he can at least threaten with and try and create a scramble back to the feet. Now, the one stat I want to point out is the significant strike accuracy. You can see Gunnar Nelson is at #1 with 57%. That's based on 170 strikes thrown. That's total in his UFC career. Now, Fight Metric usually uses a 350 punch minimum, but Gunnar Nelson, if we remove that, Gunnar Nelson sits right at the top of those rankings. So he's very much about quality over quantity. He's going to step in with one single shot or two shots and put you on the floor where he can start working his ground game.
Really interesting stuff, Dan. Thank you very much. Well, we've been keeping Dan very busy. Earlier this week, he laced up his gloves to go on the mat and demonstrate some of the key techniques these welterweights might employ.
The co-main event bout between Gunnar Nelson and Alan Jouban is probably the most intriguing fight on the card. As we know, Gunnar Nelson is a very patient, very calm fighter who likes to leap in from a karate stance and snap a power punch before he clinches and drags you to the floor, where he can work a progression of positions until he gets the submission he's looking for. Alan Jouban, on the other hand, is a very talented southpaw Muay Thai fighter who likes to set people up with a right hook, left hand combination and a very powerful left kick. But the technique that I want to focus on today is the left elbow of Alan Jouban. And if you look at these two examples, you'll see how he uses it to perfection to win fights. For Alan Jouban to use this elbow, he needs to catch Gunnar Nelson as he's stepping in to try and clinch. We know Gunnar Nelson's style. We know he likes to close that distance and get the body lock so he can start working his trips and takedowns. So as Gunnar Nelson's stepping in, Alan Jouban's going to need to use this single necktie to catch his opponent and stop that forward momentum. So as I'm here with my opponent, Dean, Dean's going to step in, and what I'm looking to do is to stop that momentum with this forearm here. So I have my elbow, my forearm pushing against his shoulder to stop that forward momentum, and I also have the hand on the back of the head, so I have some control. I can also pull him towards me if I need to. Now, one other thing that I do have in this situation is Dean's forward momentum driving forward. So I can use this against him. And with this control of the back of the head, I can remove my front foot and allow this momentum to pull him off balance, assisted by my grip. What he's going to do then is he's going to base on this foot because he can feel himself falling off balance. And as he drives back, I can assist him coming back onto my elbow. And he hits right on the point, on the temple, and usually knocks the guy out cold. It's a beautiful technique. Gunnar Nelson's a sequence fighter, and what I mean by this is that he knows the series of moves that he needs to follow to get the result that he wants. There are 3 fights he's had in the octagon that fall under the same blueprint, the same sequence of moves, and the same submission at the end, and that's what I'm going to show you today.
Oh! He got caught! And Nelson all over him. His technique is so excellent. He's going to tap. He's tapping.
And it's all over! Gunnar Nelson by submission!
Gunnar Nelson's sequence starts on the feet. He likes to wait at range, be very, very patient, and then lunge in with a powerful backhand from either a southpaw or orthodox position. From there, he'll stun his opponent with the shot, he'll drag them down to the floor, and then he'll progress his position until he finds himself in mount. And that's where he poses most of his attacks from. So I've got Dean on the floor here. Now, and Dean will tell you, you've grappled with him, his mount is ridiculous, right?
It's like an anvil on top of you.
Like an anvil, like a ton of bricks. So the reason that this is, you'll see Gunnar Nelson keeps his chest quite low to his opponent. A lot of the time in MMA, people sit up so they can punch, but Gunnar Nelson stays very low, chest to chest, and spreads his base so he's very, very wide, very difficult to move him and set him off balance. So what you'll tend to find is opponents will start to push on the hips and try and bridge and shrimp to escape and get back to guard. Gunnar denies this by using a crossface or a shoulder pressure here. So he'll grab through and he'll drive the shoulder into the face, and at the same time he'll start removing these grips to remove this line of defense. And then from that position, he can start using that shoulder pressure to force his opponent to turn in one particular way so he can take the back.
I mean, he's just flowing all over him with beautiful precision. Full mount for Gunnar Nelson.
So as I said, Gunnar likes to use shoulder pressure to force his opponent and make them turn. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to slide my arm underneath. This is the side that Gunnar likes to use most of the time. He drives his left shoulder in and he bases out with his right hand. So what he's going to do is he's going to force his opponent to start to bridge. And as he does that, he lifts his weight off and he floats and slides his hooks in. Now he has the back. The next stage is he's going to feed this arm underneath and grab the wrist control. And then he's going to push, use this hook here and bump his opponent over to this position where he can get the body triangle. And this can be a very, very suffocating position. You can really put a lot of squeeze and a lot of pressure on your opponent here. From this position now, he has a free arm. Tied this one up, he'll start to hit and strike and look for openings. Now what he does here, a lot of the time, he likes to use his knuckles and he likes to wrap into the ribs. What this does is makes his opponent pull their arm down, which exposes a window here. He punches through, arm under the chin, hand on the bicep, fist on the back of the neck, and then squeeze. And that's the Gunnar Nelson submission. We've seen it 3 times in the octagon, and he gets it every time with that same sequence.
Dan, I love that term, sequence fighter. So if you're Alan Jouban looking at Gunnar Nelson, once he gets in a sequence, it often leads to him finishing the fight. So does he therefore need to be looking at disrupting a rhythm and maybe dragging this fight into deep water?
Well, yeah, I mean, because he can identify the sequence that Gunnar follows, he can figure out different opportunities to break that sequence, to break that rhythm. If we watch the Rick Story fight against Gunnar Nelson, the first line of defence obviously was the takedown defence. When that option's taken away, then Gunnar has to resort to his striking, which obviously plays into Alan's game to a certain extent. The second, obviously, line of defence is on the ground, as we saw in the Damian Maia fight. So Alan knows the ways in which he can stop this sequence playing out. Whether he has the skills to do it is really the question that we've got to ask.
Another thing I like about this is it's karate versus Muay Thai, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu versus 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. Does that kind of stuff excite you guys? It's like the old traditional versus the new school thoughts.
I like it, especially because they are so different. You know, I mean, Muay Thai is a very raw form of striking. It's the most complete form of striking, in my opinion. And 10th Planet is a very, very developmental style of jiu-jitsu. It's constantly evolving. There are always new techniques coming through, whereas Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and SBG are established. We know what they do. We know what they're very good at. So it's maybe easier to plan for that. But Gunnar Nelson is one of the best representatives that they have. So stopping it is another thing.
And I was lucky enough to actually go out to Iceland at the beginning of the year, and there was a real sentiment where everyone's like, we need Gunnar to be back in the octagon. He missed his shots, headlining Belfast. It was a foot injury.
Yeah.
We're welcoming him back.
We welcome him back, but we need a big performance. We need him back to being the Gunny Nelson he was when he first broke into the UFC. Don't forget, when Gunny first got into the UFC, he was the superstar coming out of Europe. He's been completely and utterly overshadowed by his training partner, Conor McGregor, who's, took the ball and completely run with it. And Gunny now has got to prove that he too is deserving of a place, of a title shot, of the top billing in the UFC. His top 10 ranking at welterweight is at stake in this fight. There's a lot of pressure on Gunny to not only turn up, but actually perform.
Yeah, and Alan Jouban he's a little more senior in years, but with his type of fighting, as soon as I see him on a fight, sign me up, take my money, I want to watch this guy. He is dangerous. He does get caught, but he's very, very exciting. A very, very dangerous fight for Gunnar.
He's a big risk taker, and that's what makes him exciting, and that's why I'm a big fan of his style. And the one thing that we can't forget about Alan is, yes, he's a fairly new addition to mixed martial arts, but that doesn't mean he's not been training for a long time. This guy is a professional model and a very, very successful one. So his MMA career was somewhat put to one side while he was focusing on that, because that's how he made his money. But now he has his opportunity with the UFC. He gives it everything he's got. And, he's travelling around. He trains at Black House, at 10th Planet. He's working with the Machida brothers to prepare for that karate styling. So he's a very, very talented fighter, and although he's slightly more advanced in years than Gunnar, that adds to his experience.
Training with Kenny Johnson at Black House is a big thing.
Yes.
Touched on it then. Rick Story completely negated Gunnar's game plan because his takedown defence was so strong. He just wouldn't let Gunnar take him down there, and that's how he won the fight. And Kenny Johnson is the kind of coach who's got the experience to get Jouban to where he needs to be.
Yeah, and Jouban's never been submitted as well, which is something to go into this fight with Gunnar Nelson.
Well, it's got to give him confidence. He knows the stages that he needs to go through to defend these takedowns and to defend these chokes. And the rear naked choke is probably the most utilised submission in the UFC. So that's the first line of defence that most people work on the ground. I've drilled back defence and rear naked choke defence until I've gone blue in the face before, and that's the easiest one to defend for me because it's the most familiar. Now, with the 10th Planet guys, because they're constantly throwing new things at you, things that you've never seen before, there's always that concern that you're going to get caught with something that you're not aware of. And because Gunnar's got such a strong basic game, there may be something that catches him unaware that at least makes him just pull out for a second and go, hang on a minute, maybe I don't want to engage here, which will give Alan the opportunity to get back to his feet.
Yeah.
Well, it's a huge opportunity for him to climb into the top 10.
Yeah.
So for him, how do you think he's feeling about that, and do you think that he can do it?
I think he comes here with absolutely nothing to lose. I think, obviously Gunny's got a massive following in Europe, as you say. Then the fans have been waiting for Gunny to return for so long, but the fans here are praying for this kind of big performance from Gunny Nelson to prove he belongs where he is. There's no pressure on Alan Jouban whatsoever. He's going to come over here, do his thing, and I think, while the fans on the night will be in Gunny's corner, the bookies will definitely be back in Alan Jouban.
In here, what are you saying? What are you thinking?
I think it's tough for Gunny. I think Jouban probably gets a finish in this one.
Yeah?
Yeah.
OK. Well, it is a great fight. Can't wait for it. Welcome back to UFC Breakdown. So after a professional career spanning nearly 13 years, Brad One Punch Pickett has announced that his upcoming fight in London will be his last. We sent a crew out to Florida to check in with Brad to see how he's doing before his final walk to the octagon.
It's nice to retire on my own terms. I'm glad that I've had a long career in this sport. I'm definitely going to miss it, but now, I think it's time. I have no regrets. I would 100% do it all again. Knowing that the UFC only comes to London once a year, I wanted to be on that card, and I think I owe it to myself, and that just to retire in front of my home crowd. Being in my last fight camp, I definitely had to come out to American top team. This has been a big part of my career. The coaches here, the training partners here.
It's a little bit, surreal. This is the last one. I'm a little nervous on hey, how much am I going to see my good friend now? I'm excited for the fight, and I think it's going to be a special night.
I like to say I tapered down my sparring a little bit more, but I don't. I like to spar. But it's not as fun as it used to be because I don't recover in between training sessions as much as I used to. Now I look at these young studs training and I'm like, I get annoyed. You know, youth is like the best gift anyone could give you. Man, it sucks getting old, especially being an athlete.
Yeah, I'm okay. Getting old for this.
Good. Brad, right here. 30 seconds on the back. 30 seconds.
Every fight he's ever been in, no matter who it's with, you're going to get a crazy fight, wild fight. It's one of the things I always looked up to Brad for doing that. You know, he knows how to make people feel good, and he knows how to entertain the world.
When you get your hand raised in the cage in the octagon, it makes all the hours in here, the sacrifices you make, traveling, missing the family, it makes it all worthwhile, you know. So this camp's definitely an emotional one. So win, lose, draw, whatever, I'm gonna be in bits afterwards.
It's been a massive roller coaster for me my whole fight career, starting in London, finishing in London. It's just mad looking back on so many memories. I have a lot of personal highlights in my career. Fighting in the WEC, my first fight won by proving neck tie.
Brad Pickett gets it done by way of Peru.
I beat Demetrius Johnson.
Oh, and he's going for a ride. Huge slam.
Then I fought Ivan Menjivar in the last ever WEC card.
Oh, God, in the pocket, slugging it out. What a battle.
Then when I went over to the UFC, obviously with a name like One Punch, you have to live up to every now and again.
Living up to the moniker, Brad, One Punch Pickett.
That was a great moment for me, you know, so yeah, I lived up to my name that night. When I come out and I hear the crowd, that's for me, that's when I come alive. That's when I know I was born to entertain. In this sport, there's a lot of pressure on winning. Because if you win, you go down a certain door. You lose, you go down a certain door. I'm going through the same door no matter what. So there's no pressure on me winning or losing.
Brad Pickett.
I just want to go out there and be involved in a really good fight and put on a typical one-punch performance.
Brad, One Punch Pickett!
And then just leave my hat and my gloves in the middle of the octagon and leave it all behind me.
Nick, earlier you heard me say the words fan favourite. Why is it that the fans adore him so much?
I've got to get over that first. It's quite emotional. It took me for a minute. You know, I could feel that already. There's still some time to go before the fight, but I'm already feeling quite choked up over it. But because he's never in a bad fight, let's be honest, and he's not just a fan favourite. He's Dana White's one of Dana White's favourite fighters as well.
Yeah.
You know, he's never ever been in a bad fight in his entire career. And you know, for someone that's followed Brad for a good decade or more, right through from his UK days and then into WEC and then obviously now the UFC and everything else, it's going to be an incredible night. And we know what we're going to get. We're going to get 3 rounds of non-stop action, hundreds of punches, a little bit of everything, and a war. You know, that's what Brad's all about.
He doesn't want 3 rounds. He wants like one punch and a finish.
And the other thing with Brad as well is that, you know, we get a lot of fighters, they lose and they'll kind of hide away for a little while. Brad's so real. So the roller coaster that he's been on throughout his career, the fans have been on it as well. I mean, just watching that, I felt very emotional because I've experienced that as he's you know, progressed through his career as well. He's just a very real person, and people like to live vicariously through fighters, and you're not going to get a person that's more real than Brad Pickett.
Yeah.
Age. It's something that we're all fighting, but Dan, as an athlete, I guess it's a ticking thing for you guys. How important is it that Brad is able to leave on, in his words, in his own terms or on his own terms?
I think it's very important, and I think it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Even the greats don't hardly ever do it. You know what I mean? A lot of the time you kind of get caught up in the lifestyle of being an athlete, and then when that comes to an end, you kind of feel a little bit lost because you defined yourself by that person. Yeah. And when that's taken away, it's difficult to know what to do with yourself. Now, the benefit for Brad is that he's already bringing up the next generation of fighters. He's already kind of paved the way for them in the UFC, but now he's, you know, helping guys in the gym, he's helping them at promotions and stuff as well. So I think he's going to still be a very integral role, and I think that's going to help him in his transition into retirement. But it's going to be a difficult process no matter what.
What is it about his style then, that boxing style? Even when he comes second in a fight, it's still a fight of the night bonus that lands in his pocket as well.
Because he rolls the dice, you know. The complaint about fighters is that sometimes they don't take risks, and you know, and the higher up the rankings that you get, the less risks people take because the stakes are higher. Brad has never been one of those guys. He's always willing to take a risk. He's always willing to throw a punch to take a punch, and a lot of the time, you know, he lands with weight, he lands with power, and because he's such an exciting guy, the fans just love him, and I think that energy behind him as well from the fans is really what pushes him to put on these performances, because he does love his support.
Over the course of the years, you know, that recklessness may have cost them opportunities, may have cost them wins, almost certainly has cost them wins. But as fans, we don't care, because it's the entertainment value that he provides. You know, for us, for UK fight fans, Brad Pickett is a champion, will always be a champion, and it's going to be such an emotional night.
How do you think he's going to deal with that emotion? Keep in mind, though, he's never lost in London for the UFC, but that's going to be a really difficult one for him to keep in check.
Yeah, and we could see there as well from his coach. You know, Mike Brown's just as upset as Brad is.
Best man at his wedding.
Exactly, and it was quite touching in the video then. He was like, when am I going to see my best friend again? When are we going to spend time together? And I think, you know, Brad's obviously got all that to deal with in the run-up to this fight, but what was great then, what he did say was, there's zero pressure in terms of win you go that way, lose you go that way. Whatever happens, Brad's going straight ahead, regardless of what happens in the fight. So hopefully that takes the pressure off. I just hope for his own sake that he can enjoy it, savour it, and really take it in, because I tell you what, the fans are going to turn up for him in force.
He's hit a bit of a speed bump, so his opponent has once again changed, and we saw on social media that he was rocked by that one. That, combined with last fight in London, how's he going to cope with that, Dan, from a fighter's perspective?
Well, Brad's a fighter's fighter. He's going to get in there and do his job no matter what. I would imagine the frustration comes from the weeks that he spent preparing for one particular fighter to then have that fighter switch for somebody else who has a very, very different style, if we're honest. So, I mean, there are some adjustments for him to make, but with the experience that he's got and with the fighters that he's faced in his career, he's already covered all the ground that he needs to beat anybody in the division. It's just a case of putting it together on the night, and that's where the pressure comes in.
Yeah, Marlon Vera is kind of a new school guy coming through. He's hard to dislike as well. Really nice kid from Ecuador against the wily veteran. Yeah. Does it matter, though? Does any of that matter?
Obviously, you're talking about a 24-year-old kid now coming in against the guy who's already accepted the fact that, you know, age is catching up with him. So, obviously, down the stretch, obviously that's what Vera's got in mind. But to be honest, with this being his final fight, this being his swan song in London, you know, it's going to take far more than Vera to stop Brad Pickett getting a W in this one. Well,
now we're all getting all romantic about Brad Pickett. Let's take our minds back. Favourite moment for you?
I love the first time I ever seen him in Cage Rage back in 2007, 2008, I think it was. But for me, the standout moments, WEC, when he beat Demetrius Johnson. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. He put a beating on Demetrius Johnson, currently the pound-for-pound best fighter on the planet today. And Brad absolutely saved him in that fight, put him down so many times. Superman punches, left hooks, catching his kicks, slamming him on his back. That was vintage Brad Pickett. He'd have beat anybody on that night. And that, for me, that's the telling moment of his entire career that I'll always savour.
Dan, you and Brad are like the second wave of UK guys to really push the scene forward. I'm sure you've got some memories of Brad maybe on the circuit.
Yeah, well, my very second pro fight, we shared the fight card. He won that by a knockout with one punch. And then the next time we shared a card was in Nottingham, my hometown, my last fight. And again, he won by one punch knockout. But the thing that stands out to me is the day before, we're standing backstage at the weigh-ins. And obviously, he's full of beans. He's really excited, as he always is. And he said, as soon as I've got the fight won, if I finish the guy, I'm going to do Gangnam Style. And I just thought to myself, if you get the knockout that you want, and then you follow it with Gangnam Style, fair play to you, because that's a bold move. And, you know, sure enough, and that I still think is the best punch he's ever thrown. I mean, what a beautiful uppercut, timed perfectly, landed on the Ojibwe, put him on the canvas, and then, you know, true to his word, Gangnam Style, joined by the rest of the crowd. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, encapsulates his personality. He's such a good guy. We've got such a lot to thank him for as part of the MMA community. And yeah, really looking forward to that send-off. Guys, that's about all we got time for. Nick, great to see you. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Dan, as usual, that expert analysis, very nice indeed. Well, that's it for this episode. Head on over to UFC.com to find out where you can watch UFC Fight Night London in your territory. Also, make sure you follow at UFC Europe on Twitter. We'll be having a crew going around with some of these featured fighters, catching up with what they do during fight week. But from all of us here at UFC Breakdown, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Nights don't get bigger than this in London.